Samuel Adams was the kind of guy who could walk into a tavern and walk out with a revolution. He wasn't rich, he wasn't polished, and he spent most of his life half broke wearing clothes that made wealthier men sneer. But none of that mattered. Adams had fire in his pen, in his speeches, and in his vision of liberty. When others hesitated, he pushed harder. When others doubted, he stirred the crowd until there was no doubt left. Samuel Adams was an agitator who turned discontent into organized resistance. The strategist who made the Boston the beating heart of the revolution and the voice that never let the idea of freedom die. If the American Revolution had a spark plug, it was him. And that's why history remembers Samuel Adams as the Firebrand revolutionary. Welcome to our republic.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political band,
sailors and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force.
Well, I think it's time we ask ourselves if we still know the freedoms that were intended for us by the founding fathers. Not
Those three hallowed words reverently dictate what you ought to be, what you can be, what you will be.
we pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor.
Samuel Adams was born in 1722 in Boston into a family that owned a brewing business. Weird. How did Samuel Adams beer brewing family? Wow. Anyway, I'm just kidding around. His father, a devout Puritan, instilled in him a sense of morality and civic of moral duty and civic responsibility. Just tongue twisters this morning. Adams attended Harvard College, where he studied theology and political philosophy. His thesis, that it was lawful to resist political authority when it threatened liberty. That idea wasn't just academic for him. It was the seed that grew into the convictions of his later life. But unlike some of the other fathers, Adams didn't shine in business. He inherited part of the family brewery, but it failed. He worked as a tax collector, but he was notoriously bad at it. Not least because he sympathized with the people he was supposed to be collecting from. He spent much of his life in debt. What he did have, however, was a gift for writing, speaking, and mobilizing. Now, by the seventh, I keep saying 19, right? Because I don't know anyway. Maybe it's because I was born then. By the 1760s, Britain began imposing new taxes on the colonies. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend duties, these laws outraged colonists, but it was Samuel Adams who transformed their anger into action. Man, we need people like that today, I think. Man, I'm the only one I can think of is CK. That's it, really. He wrote essays under pseudonyms, publishing in every newspaper and pamphlets, framing the debate not as taxes on paper or tea, but as the struggle of liberty against tyranny. Adams was one of the first to argue that Parliament had no right to legislate for the colonies at all. To him, it was simple. If colonists weren't represented, they weren't bound. This wasn't moderation. This was revolution in seed form, right? Adams wasn't just a writer. Again, he was an organizer. And so in 1765, when the Stamp Act hit, Adams helped form the Sons of Liberty, a secret society dedicated to resisting British policies. And the Sons weren't polite petitioners. They staged demonstrations, hung effigies of tax collectors, tarred and feathered officials, and intimidated anyone willing to enforce the Crown's laws. And Adam understood something many didn't. Protests had to be seen and felt to matter. He coordinated the spectacle while maintaining just enough deniability to avoid arrest. The Sons of Liberty made Boston the center of defiance, and Adams was the heart of it. Tensions in Boston exploded on March 5th, 1770, when British soldiers opened fire on a crowd, killing 5 colonists. And it could have been dismissed as a riot gone wrong, but Adams knew how to make it unforgettable. Through fiery speeches, engravings, pamphlets, he branded it the Boston Massacre, transforming the event into a symbol of British opposition. He organized funeral processions and public outrage, ensuring that every colonist saw the blood on British hands. The courtroom defense of the soldiers was handled by John Adams, which we talked about before, but the court of public opinion, that belonged to Samuel Adams. He turned tragedy into propaganda that hardened American resolve. 3 years later, Adams orchestrated his most famous act of defiance. In 1773, when British forced colonists to accept taxed tea, Adams and his allies decided to act. On December 16th, men disguised as Mohawk Indians boarded ships in Boston Harbor. And under Adams' coordination, they dumped 342 chests of tea, nearly $1 million worth of today's money, into the sea. Now, my cousin, he participated in it as well, and no, not back in the 1773. It was about 2 years ago. He went to the Boston Harbor and dumped his own tea in there. I'm proud of you, brother. I love you. But this was bold. Not what my cousin did, what John Adams did. It was illegal, and it was unforgettable. Adams framed it not as vandalism, but as the only defense left to free men. The Boston Tea Party shocked Britain, enraging Parliament, and pushed America closer to rebellion. And when the First Continental Congress met in 1774, Adams was there representing Massachusetts. His reputation as a firebrand preceded him, but his influence was undeniable. He lobbied, persuaded, and pressed delegates towards unity and resistance. And by the Second Continental Congress, Adams was the first to openly call for independence. While men like John Dickinson thought reconciliation, Adams saw it as betrayal. Independence was not a dream to him, it was necessity. Adams served as governor of Massachusetts after the Revolution, helping rebuild the state battered by war, but his greatest legacy was already secure. He wasn't the man designing the Constitution or building national finance. He was the voice that pushed America into the fight in the first place. And Adams lived to see the nation he had helped ignite. Adam lived to see the nation he helped ignite, dying in 1803 at the age of 81. Again, Samuel Adams, the firebrand revolutionary. He wasn't wealthy. He wasn't polished. He didn't leave behind a masterwork of political philosophy. What he left was something more visceral, the energy, the fire, the spark that transformed discontent into revolution. I really appreciate you taking the time to listen today. And remember, history isn't boring. It's the story of voices that refuse to be silenced until freedom is won. We'll see you next time.